17,000 was to say that, look, the 17,000 is about half the per capita energy capacity that South Africa has. Right now, we are less than 1/10 of what South Africa has in terms of energy per capita. So
energy
per capita, per person.
Consumption
of energy per person. So essentially looking at generation, but not only at generation, but also at transmission. Because as you know, Nigeria's problem is not just generating energy. In fact, perhaps our more fundamental problem is the fact that we have a grid that is obsolete, and we have a grid that does not have the capacity. So a lot of people will talk about things like stranded power, where today in Nigeria, there are about 7,000 megawatts of theoretical generation capacity.
Sorry, just very quickly. For your party, one major grid or multiple mini grids?
It is multiple mini grids.
Okay. All right.
Multiple mini grids, absolutely. So we started by looking at what other people are doing. We started by then identifying where we want Nigeria to be within an amount of time. And we're looking at 4 years, because we don't want to be that party that comes in and presents a manifesto that takes 8 years. And then we get into office and start explaining to people that, oh, the manifesto we gave you was not achievable in 4 years, and, you know, we need the remainder of the 4 years.
So everything in this document in front of me is your first 4 years.
That is what we believe is achievable within a 4-year time frame. And we'll tell you why. So in looking at that, the deficit, as you indicated, is much larger. We looked at comparable economies, decided that, look, achieving within the 4-year time frame a total energy capacity within Nigeria, both generation and transmission, that was 24,000 megawatts was what was achievable. The second thing is
that's your estimate of what is achievable.
That is our estimate of both what is achievable and what is needed to sustain the economic growth that we are targeting.
At a very minimum.
At a very minimum, that is where we want to get to.
Okay.
So the deficit, starting from where we are today, is about 17,000 megawatts in terms of generation capacity, looking at the 7,000 megawatts already in place, and it is bigger than that by another 2,000 megawatts or so based on the transmission capacity. To the point you raised earlier, our fundamental belief is that we must look at mini grid systems. This idea that all the power that is generated must go to one single grid is part of what has led to problems. There were instances in the past where even things like sabotage, if you have a government and people are not happy with the government, if all I did was there was a time when the entire Southeast was actually in darkness because people took down transmission pylons that were somewhere in the Osogbo area. So what we want to do is to ensure that we're able to go into localities, create economic zones, create zones maybe for hospitals, create zones for schools.
As is done in any federal country.
Absolutely.
Which practices federalism.
That's exactly right.
Okay. All right. Now, I have one question, which is the estimated power need of Nigeria based on our population, the size of our economy, for everybody to have electricity daily is at least 160,000 megawatts. You are aiming for a modest 24,000 because you believe that that is the minimum. If SOWORE is president for 8 years, what then happens?
At a minimum, it doubles.
You go to 48.
At a minimum, it doubles.
Okay. So you do that how?
So we and I think fundamentally your question is how do we fund?
Yeah. No. What kind of energy mix?
Again, a great question. So we have, in addition to the fact that we have significant deficits in just being able to generate power, one of the travesties of our current situation is that we rely on a single source. It's natural gas. If you would recall, there was a time where most of the power plants, and because of geopolitical zoning, we have situations where power plants are in the middle of nowhere in the north, and we have a 1,000-kilometer pipeline taking natural gas from the south-south, where the gas is being generated from places like Bonny, and moving it all the way in pipelines. All I have to do if I was a terrorist is blow that pipeline in one place. And all of a sudden it means that all the gas that was supposed to provide energy to some of those natural gas-fired plants are going to be done. Over 60% of Nigeria's energy generation capacity is actually based on the use of natural gas. So here's what we do. We diversify the energy mix for two reasons.
Diversify into what?
So for two reasons. One is strategic. We diversify it into renewables, solar, things like wind, biomass. We include not just natural gas, but a portion of the natural gas is going to be liquefied natural gas, so that in addition to having physical pipelines, we also can also have virtual pipelines where you have trucks, in the same way that trucks are moving liquid petroleum products today. We can take that gas, liquefy it, and begin to transport it to places where it's needed to ensure that we don't run into issues like having situations where a terrorist attack might actually take down the energy system in different places. We do not believe in going back to things like dirty fossil fuels like coal. But then we also have technologies today that are called clean coal energy technologies. If you go to a country like the United States, over 60% of the energy being generated is done using coal. That coal it's a clean coal technology. Enugu is full of coal. So our fundamental belief is that those 24,000 megawatts, at least 4,500 megawatts of that is going to be renewable energy. It's going to be solar, it's going to be wind. If you go to the northeastern parts of the country, if you go to the northwestern parts of the country, those are Sahel, Savannah, Guinea Savannah regions where you have extensive wind resources available. So it's basically solar, it's wind, it's biomass, it is liquefied natural gas.
Do you think we can do what they are doing in Bangladesh, which is aiming to put about 850,000 people on solar a year?
That's absolutely achievable. So if you look at the 4,500 megawatts that we're talking about, 4,500 out of the almost 25,000 megawatts is essentially almost 25% of it. So what we're basically saying is that we're even going beyond what Bangladesh is doing. We're saying we're going to a place where almost 1/5, almost 25% of the energy mix in this country, 25% of 180 million people, basically about 45 million people. We're saying not just 800 and something thousand people that other countries are thinking about, but that we can put almost 45 million people on an energy mix that is part of which is mostly driven by renewables.
Okay. Just one half question, then we move to the next subject. You missed something which is in your manifesto.
What is it?
Biomass.
I mentioned the biomass.
Waste.
Yes. So that's the biomass aspect.
How many megawatts do you think you can generate?
We think
waste?
We can
because
generate.
Waste is a huge problem in Lagos.
It's a huge problem, absolutely. So
and just Lagos alone.
That's right. So here's what I'll tell you. A city the size of Lagos with, it's arguable, but at least about 20 million people. Take the city of New York, for example. I'll use New York as an example. The city of New York, all the waste in that city goes into recycling. Yeah. And a portion of it also goes into generating energy. You can generate from Lagos State alone at a minimum about 1,000 megawatts of power from both solid waste, which is all the stuff that people are putting into their dustbins and rubbish bins, and also from the feces that people pass that is going into septic tanks and is going into the, that right now is considered to be a nuisance. But the reality is in other countries, that is a significant source of, a potential source of biomass related energy.
Okay. All right. We'll deal with 2 issues out of the 10.
Okay.
That you have in your manifesto because of time. But I like the numbers that you are putting out. Okay. Last week, someone stood in your position and said he's not going to talk of numbers. And everybody knows what happened. Yeah. Okay. So, restructuring.
Yes.
A lot of people have tweeted in or called in saying restructuring is a big issue for them.
Yes.
So this is one of the more popular crowdsourced questions.
Yes.
Various angles to it. But first, let's ask, what's your party and SOWORE's position on restructuring?
So we recognize...
And when you say, you tell us what you understand to be restructuring.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our fundamental understanding of restructuring and the call for restructuring is actually a cry by Nigerians for good governance. What Nigerians are saying, we believe, when they talk about restructuring, is that what we've seen so far in the 58 years of the existence of this nation is that the type of governments we have run, for the most part, there was a time when government was of a nature where we truly did see some development. So if you go back to the 57 to the 63, 1957 to the 1963 timeframe, we had a situation in this country where there was intense competition between the regions. The first TV station in Africa was in Ibadan.
The WNTV.
That's right. Within months or years, the Eastern region had opened up a TV station as well. Nsukka was set up. The Western region responded with Obafemi Awolowo University. In the Northern region, it was ABU. So the reality was, there was a time in this country when the nature of governance was at a regional level, at a level that seemed to work for Nigeria's people. Now, yes, we ran into trouble. Yes, there was a coup and a counter coup, and now we find ourselves where we are. So our fundamental belief is that the first thing is that the call for restructuring is a cry, a heartfelt cry from Nigerians that what we have had for most of the last 58 years is not working. Now, we also know that the over-centralization of government in Nigeria has led to a situation where if you are not close to the government in power, then the local levels that you come from will suffer. So one fundamental thing we believe is that government should be from the bottom up, that most of what happens in the lives of citizens...
How many tiers of government would you propose?
So it would still be no more than the 3 tiers of government. It would be the local government level and the wards and councils under them. It would be the state level, and it would be the federal level. This is what we say in our document. If Nigerians want a different structure, if, for example, Nigerians wanted maybe geopolitical zones to be the basis of state organization.
Like regional parliament.
We propose that Nigerian people should determine that in an open referendum. Part of the problem we've had in this country is that we talk about restructuring and we expect a National Assembly that benefits from the unstructured format of Nigeria to be the ones to drive restructuring. There's no way that people benefiting from a system are going to undo the same system they benefit from. And one of the things you will hear my principal, SOWORE, talk about a lot is that one also has to take with a grain of salt the calls for restructuring from this present political class. They've been in positions over the last 20, 30 years to actually implement. So what typically happens is anytime somebody falls out of power, restructuring becomes the rallying cry that gives them a call that allows them to begin to try to claim that they are speaking for the people. So back to your question, we fundamentally believe that the Nigerian state and its structure can be improved. We believe that we have not truly seen whether this, to the extent that this system works, because we've not had responsible people in government that will make it work. So, for example, on paper today, local governments in Nigeria are supposed to be very powerful. They're supposed to be the ones that are going to drive primary education. Funds are not even released to the local governments by state governors. We have a lot of situations where state governors can decide when and if they want to stage local government elections.
Okay. Let's pivot quickly into education and corruption.
Yes.
Because that touched on an issue there. We'll just
marry the two.
Yes, we'll just marry the two. So, education crisis.
Yes.
Everywhere.
Absolutely.
Primary, secondary, tertiary is
Yes.
a catastrophe. Just summarize, because we have, like, am I looking at the right clock? Okay. So just summarize, what would be your priority for education?
We believe every Nigerian child should go to school. We believe every Nigerian child should have a right to a high quality education, regardless of whether their parents are rich or poor. We believe every Nigerian child should have a right to a good education, regardless of what part of the country they come from. So our priority will be to strengthen the educational system that as we currently have it.
How? We
Put more funds.
Big on the how here.
So I'll break down the how. So the first thing is over 10 million children are out of school. If you go to Kano today, there are millions of children running the streets. They are the Almajiri. We call the Almajiri out completely. Today, they go to an institution But the only thing they get is Quranic education. They don't get any Western education. We're going to formalize those schools. Because the reality is the parents want them to have that type of education. But there's no reason why having an Almajiri education should not also provide you with access to a modern education. So for those 10 million kids out of school, because they are under the Almajiri system, they're going to be formalized.
It's more than 10 million, actually.
Now, for the others, for the other cadres, so for the primary schools, for the secondary schools, for the universities, we are going to increase the funding that goes to education. Today, the educational budget for Nigeria is 7% of the total budget, about 650 billion naira, for almost what a lot of people estimate to be at least about 70 million students across 60% of this country.
What does your party think the budget should be?
So our party, we subscribe to the notion that for a developing nation like Nigeria, in order to truly fund education the way it needs to be funded, that at least about, in the beginning phases, 20 to 25% of your budget should be dedicated to education. But we don't just want to throw flat percentage of GDP numbers, because as our economy grows and our economy becomes 2, 3, 4 times what it is today, it will not make any sense that the educational budget should just be a flat 25% of whatever that number
because
is.
Because in reality, a flat percentage will actually be a regression.
It will, exactly.
If the population is growing.
So that's if the population grows. But if the economy grows 2, 3, 4 times its current size, then it means that now your educational budget, you now run into a situation where you start playing with money because there's too much money to play with. But we fundamentally believe that the way we work backwards is that the educational budget must guarantee that there is at least somewhere in the region of 100,000 to 200,000 allocated per child across...
Per capita?
Yes, per child.
Okay.
So it's a smaller fraction of the per capita, very close to the per capita,
because children are a
subset of the total population. Absolutely. So that's our fundamental belief. We believe that at the end of the day, economic growth is going to be driven. If you look at any society that has advanced, innovation starts from the universities. Innovation starts from the classroom, and we're not going to get innovation unless we're funding those things. There's no money that goes into research. There's no money that goes into teaching. There's no money that goes into training.
So this is why all the big tech companies, the founders, most of them are from some of the best universities.
That's true.
Whether they even dropped out or not.
But that's a very important point. In our manifesto, we indicate that one of the first things we're going to do is employ 200,000 teachers, first of all, across the country, mostly to shore up what's going on at the primary.
How did you reach that figure? Very summarily, we have to take a break for ads, but summarily, how did you reach the figure of 200,000?
So the way we reached that figure was we looked at across the country. There are 774 local government areas in the country. But if you look in terms of need, the bigger need is actually mostly in many of our northern regions. So when we averaged it out, the idea is that if you look across all the different local government areas, we wanted to make sure there were at least 200 new teachers in every local government area. So working from 200 teachers minimum in every local government area, you have 774 local government areas in the country. That puts you in the region of about 160,000 teachers. We then identified that there were certain parts of the country where the deficit was even bigger. I just spoke with you about the Almajiri situation in the north, and we decided that they would need more teachers. So that extra balance of the 40,000 comes from trying to make sure that we shore up that deficit in those areas.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. We'll take a short break for ads. When we come back, we'll talk about corruption.
Yes.
Which means we would have covered 4 pillars in your manifesto, which are also 4 important issues that the audience have said they want to talk about. The only issue not in your manifesto, which audience wants to talk about, is security vote. So we'll come to corruption, then security votes, and then we'll take it from there if we have more time.
All right. Thank you, sir.
The TV and over-federal class did not only create wealth for the minority, dear friends, cronies, and stalwarts, and hunger for the majority, but also created a people who see themselves as hungry Yorubas, hungry Igbos, hungry Hausas. The scenes have succeeded in creating hungry pastors and hungry imams. All this in the bid to crush the resistance by the hungry people. We shall be free the day we realize that there are only hungry Nigerians.
Take it back, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, take it back for Nigeria, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Oh, yeah, come and take it back, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, take it back for Nigeria, sorry. Take it back to the start. We need somebody correct. Shine the light in the dark to make everything connect. Pay attention to the voice. SOWORE is the choice. He is the man, he is the one. Make nobody come to make a noise. Get the ability to change our society, to bring the security for proper accountability. We need to change the level. Shebi, we need to grow. We need to SOWORE. Make poverty come out. SOWORE, SOWORE. Oh, yeah, come and take it back, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, take it back for Nigeria, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Oh, yeah, come and take it back, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, take it back for Nigeria, sorry. Allah ya idare, to gagari ya waye, godiya ga Allah. Allah ga tambawa, ga SOWORE ya danno domin talakawa, ga SOWORE ya danno domin cin gabar kasanmu. Ku zo mu je da kai gawa, waka malo, come make we dey go. We need to change the level, shebi we need to grow. We need to SOWORE, make poverty come out. SOWORE, SOWORE. Oh, yeah, come and take it back, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, take it back for Nigeria, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Oh, yeah, come and take it back, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, take it back for Nigeria, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Oh, yeah, come and take it back, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, take it back for Nigeria, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Sorry, sorry. Oh, yeah, come and take it back, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, take it back for Nigeria, sorry.
Welcome back. Number one talk, news and sports station. This is Nigeria Info.
All right, welcome back to Countdown 2019 on 99.3 Nigeria Info, and we're having discussions with the representative of Omoyele Sowore, who is the candidate of the African Action Congress. Director General of the Omoyele Sowore Campaign Organization, Dr. Malcolm Fabiyi, has been discussing here with Rotimi Sankore, taking questions from his party's manifesto. Remember, you can join the conversation not just by listening, but also going on Facebook to watch. This interview is being streamed live on Nigeria Info 99.3 Lagos. You see the homepage there and the video streaming there. So we can go ahead.
Okay. Welcome back, Malcolm.
Thank you.
All right. So, corruption.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that the state governors mostly collect their allocation.
Correct.
And the local government portion does not get to them. Is that corruption?
That is corruption. Our definition of corruption, stealing is corruption for us. Corruption for us simply means that things are not happening the way that they ought to. That people are using their position to obtain favors or to refuse rights So if a university lecturer is using his position to solicit for sexual favors, that is corruption. If a policeman
at a personal level,
but
which nevertheless
is still
impacts the system.
Yeah. If a policeman abuses his authority, if a customs person abuses authority at the borders, if an immigration agent at the airport abuses authority, if you go to get your vehicle license and you are told to do things that are beyond what is required by the law, that is corruption. If a politician refuses to take monies that are meant for their constituents to develop things that are put into the budget, that's corruption. If a government official at any level gets an allocation from the government that is intended to be used for something and they divert those funds for something else, that is corruption. So for us, yes, a governor taking funds and refusing to pass those funds on to those layers of governance below him or her, that where those funds are required, we believe that's corruption.
So how would your party fix it? I mean, beyond just telling us what your definition of corruption is, how would your party fix it in a systematic way?
So there are a number of things that we believe needs to happen. The first one is the laws on the books need to be enforced. We have a situation in this country, the same EFCC that was so effective under Ribadu was the same EFCC that became a little comatose under Waziri and has become, quite frankly, ineffectual under Magu. So we need to ask ourselves the question. It was the same set of laws that enabled Ribadu. The laws hadn't changed when Waziri took over. The laws are still the same now that Magu is there. So what is the difference? The difference we found, unfortunately, has been whether or not there has been the political will at the top from the presidency. Let's cut it out. Let's just call a spade a spade. We found that those institutions only function in an environment where there's a strong political will. And if there's one thing that Omoyele Sowore brings to the table and that our party brings to the table, it's the fact that we will be courageous in ensuring that the laws on the books in Nigeria are delivered and instituted and prosecuted to the letter.
Okay, but that's recovering.
That's
How
recovery.
about prevention?
Fantastic.
Which is really the most important.
So, this is how we propose to prevent. We will use technology to ensure that we can minimize. So I'll give you an example. If you go today to try to renew your license, it is more than likely that you'll be going there with cash. You'll be taking cash to the place, you'll be paying in cash over the counter. Somebody is going to be holding tens of thousands, sometimes even millions of naira in cash. If you're going to make lots of payments in government today, it's all cash driven. But we are in a society that is essentially a cashless society. 10, 15 years ago, Nigerians would have wads of cash in their pockets. Today, all I need is my ATM card. So if we, for example, and this is a very simple, straightforward example, if we instituted a situation where government across all levels began to move towards a cashless society, where in order to make payments into government accounts, I don't need to do it by cash. I can do it by transfers, I can do it online. I don't even need to see someone, because sometimes it is those interactions, the person who is going to bring the file. If all these files were electronic, if all I had to do was use some specific number that identifies me as an individual, whether it's a BVN number, whether it's a PVC number, a number that is unique to the individual, that substitutes for what in other countries they would call a national identity number, or even if it's a national identity card number, something that allows you, just in the same way that you can log into your bank account and make transfers, to do that. So that's one way. Remove the temptation.
Okay, but this is low level corruption.
That's low level. The second one is now procurement. So let's take procurement, for example.
Okay.
If people are competing for government contracts, there's no reason why I need to see the contractor. In other societies, what would happen is you would put out an RFP, a request for bids. The request for bids is completely electronic. The government specifies in that request for bids what the job itself.
There's a template.
There's a template.
And everyone has to meet
the job,
the
and these are the basic requirements. And then you submit. And then the criteria for evaluation is actually also, you can make it electronic. So that as people tick off, do you have this much experience? How many people are working in your organization? How many such projects have you done? You can start to narrow it down. And before you know what's going on, we can give government contracts without needing to see you, as long as you have met all the requirements. The other thing is this. Most of the companies that these people run, that they award contracts to, are companies that they own. We plan to take the entire Corporate Affairs Commission database, every single company in this country and all the directors of those companies, we're going to put them online. The other thing we're going to do is this. We're going to incentivize whistleblowing to a significant extent, so that if contracts get awarded to a company and it turns out that government officials, so first of all, by taking the Corporate Affairs Commission entire database to the internet, so that any Nigerian anywhere can pull up the CAC database.
So in other words, if a company gets a contract, you see everybody.
I can see everybody on the company. And if I know
But what if those people are proxies?
They may be proxies, but here's where the whistleblowing again can then become important. So if they are proxies, I bet you that there's somebody who knows they're a proxy. It might be the clerical worker that went to fill the forms, who was given 1,000 naira to take a bike and go do the fax, but knows that these people are making millions. That clerical worker can go in, put in a whistleblowing tip and get about 1%, 2%, or even up to 5% of the proceeds. We believe that when those different things are put in place, procurement systems that ensure that there's fairness in the selection process, cashless systems that ensure that the temptation for dealing with cash and taking cash is taken away, incentivizing reporting. Those things we believe are going to be important.
So this is if people are trying to play the system.
Correct.
Okay, so this takes us to one of the crowdsourced questions which does not align with anything in your manifesto, the security vote.
Yes.
What if people are not trying to play the system and just say, I'm going to set aside 20 billion naira as security vote, and that's the person's personal piggy bank? Okay. What then happens there? First, will you stop security votes as it is currently defined? Nobody knows what the governments are securing or how much is in every security vote. So will your party stop it?
So here's what
will your party stop security votes?
I don't believe that is a question where we can say a simple yes or no, but here is what we can say. So here's the thing.
Why can't you say yes?
The state governors are supposed to be the security officers of their states. There may be situations where there's a genuine need for the federal government to devolve the capacity for dealing with a local issue to the state. That's why we want to be careful not to just say, oh, we're going to cancel it outright. If we're talking about restructuring and we're talking about devolution, we should not only be talking about security votes. If those votes were... I'm a little sensitive about the word votes, because it denotes, there must be a crisis before you get a security vote. A security vote should not just be a flat allocation that goes to you.
Well, in the first instance, as it exists now, it's not even voted. It's arbitrary.
It's arbitrary, that's right.
And nobody knows how much or why.
So the first thing we're going to insist on is that there will be no allocations for anything that is not justified. The idea that you will have accounts, slush accounts, miscellaneous funds that are not assigned to any type of role or function,
of an amount that nobody knows,
of an amount that we believe is corruption. So a government like a household,
so in that context, your party will end it.
We will end it the way it is known today. We don't think it is right to say there will never be a security allocation, say, from the federal government to a state.
If there is a security allocation, will the public know how much it is?
Absolutely. We believe it is the right of the public to know.
And there will be proper appropriation.
There must be proper appropriation in the same way that a budget is published, in the same way that appropriations are done, in the same way that the federal government would announce, even though they don't use the monies for that they're going to spend $1 billion on buying arms for Boko Haram. Every state, every local government, every ward that receives an allocation that is extra budgetary for anything should give a true accounting of what is being done.
Okay.
And what the funds are being utilized for.
Okay. So, a few minutes to go. I saw something very interesting in your party's manifesto on minimum wage. And minimum wage is really big in the public discourse now. So, AAC says you will pay workers and youth corpers a living wage by establishing a federal minimum wage of 100,000 naira.
Absolutely.
How did you arrive at this figure?
Okay. So, by definition, the minimum wage has to be that wage that can support a family. So, the average Nigerian family.
In other words, a living wage.
It's a living wage, exactly. So, our definition of a minimum wage is a living wage. We believe that if a person, a Nigerian, goes out working for the federal government, so we make a distinction. We talk about federal government first because we talk about what we can influence. We can't force the states to do it. We can only, what we've said there is that any AAC state that we win, whatever we do at the federal level will also be passed on to the state level. So we only concentrate in this document on the federal level. There are 900,000 federal civil servants. Of those 900,000, about 700,000 of them are between grade levels 1 and grade level 11. The lowest level of grade level 11 earns 99,000. So there are about 670,000 federal civil servants that are below 100,000. Now, we define the Nigerian family as, on average, a man, his wife, and about 3 children. This wage that we're saying, so we've looked at what does it cost for housing? What does it cost for transportation? What does it cost for schooling? We're not even talking fancy schooling. We're talking a public school, those basic things for healthcare. Those basic things we believe cannot be met with less than 100,000. And in fact, for us, a living wage is part of our fight against corruption. It is hard to tell a clerk earning 20,000 naira per month to be looking at people that are stealing millions of naira, and then that person is the one moving their files around. Nobody can survive on 18,000 naira per month. Everybody knows that.
Okay. How did you arrive at the figure of 100,000?
So the 100,000, that's what I'm telling you. We looked at a family of 5, father, mother, 3 children. We said on average, if that person is paying rent, that rent is at least on a monthly basis about 20 to 30,000 naira. We've looked at feeding.
For face me, I face you.
For just on average. So remember, this is not just for the lowest cadres within the civil service. It's everybody within this bracket. That also includes people that are graduates that have worked for years. So what we've basically said is on average 20 to 30,000. There are people paying much less than that. There are also people paying much more than that. We've said, look, that family has to feed and survive. And if you look at what is going to take them to feed and survive, we've said it should be at least about 30 to 40,000 naira for them to feed and survive. So we've gone from about 20,000 for accommodation. We get to about 70,000 from including feeding, and then they must at least buy clothes. They must travel. They must fuel a car or get an Okada or do transportation. So when you look at those,
so this is tied to some kind of index.
We've tied it to an index. We've tied it to what does it take for this family to survive.
Okay, what's the basis of the index? Just summarize.
So it's essentially what do things cost out there in the Nigerian marketplace. We used real-time prices. We did surveys across the whole country. In fact, I know we don't have time to get to it, but that's also the basis under which we got to the housing deficit in the country and our estimation of what we need to do in the housing sector. So we looked at the marketplace, we looked at the basket of commodities, we looked at the per capita income in the country, and we said, look, on average, a Nigerian family at a minimum should be getting, a Nigerian worker should be getting 100,000 naira per month.
Okay. So
if I would quickly add to that, South Africa just last week raised their minimum wage from 96,000 to 126,000. That's a 30% increase.
In Naira terms.
In Naira terms. And that is not just for federal workers. That is across the board. The same people telling us they don't even want to pay a 30,000 naira minimum wage. The same people who don't want to pay 30,000 naira are telling us that it's okay for a senator to walk home with 30 million naira per month. And then they tell us, oh, it's going to cost so much. We've calculated it. You see our manifesto there. Our manifesto tells us that in order to pay this almost 670,000 people, $100,000 100,000 naira per month, it's going to cost us $1.5 billion extra per year. Our budget is about 35 billion. Our economy is $500 billion. And people are telling us that by putting in a minimum wage, that only increases it by 1.5 billion.
I
will
wish
lead
we
to
had
inflation.
more time.
So we think that's a fact.
Because I can see in your manifesto that you did some costing.
Yes, we did.
In terms of how much you will need
to pay for the things and where we will get the money from.
Unfortunately, we don't have more time. Maybe people can ask you that on social media. What's your Twitter handle?
Our Twitter handle is SOWORE 2019 campaign. Mine is DG Takeitback. So my own personal Twitter handle is DG Takeitback.
Okay. So if people ask you those, you can answer.
I would be more than happy to do so.
Okay. I just have one last question. So you said if any states
Yes.
that is run by AAC, or rather that states that are run by AAC will implement at the state level
The same thing that we're
national
doing at
policies.
the federal level. Yes.
Are you running candidates for governorship?
Oh, we are.
How many?
We are. We have about 350 candidates across the board. We fundamentally believe that it's not just about changing the person at the top. You have a National Assembly to deal with. You have a Senate, you have a House of Representatives. At the state level, you have state houses of assembly, local government chairmen.
Of those 350, how many are governorship candidates?
We have about 10 of them. So it's a small number, but we're a young party. And I think we're really proud of the fact that we've been able to raise.
How many for National Assembly?
National Assembly, we have about 40 of them running for the National Assembly, both at the Federal House and both for the House of Reps and the Senate. And then the chunk of the people running at the state level, the state houses of assembly. In fact, next month we will be running our first elections in Ondo State, where we have 40 people running for councillors and local government chairmen.
And do you think that number is enough to make a dent in the current system the way it is set up?
It will make a dent. And I think if Nigerians vote us into office, vote Omoyele Sowore as president of the country, then we will take that dent that is made by people in the National Assembly and then complement that with the hammer and the cudgel that the president of this nation wields. The presidency of Nigeria is a powerful position. So we think if we complement the presidency at the top with these positions at the local level, that it doesn't change everything overnight, but at least it begins to move us in the direction that we hope this country can move in.
Dr. Malcolm Fabiyi, thank you very much, and good luck with the SOWORE campaign.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, that's all for Countdown 29.
The TV and over federal class did not only create wealth for the minority, dear friends, cronies and stalwarts, and hunger for the majority, but also created a people who see themselves as hungry Yorubas, hungry Igbos, hungry Hausas. The scenes have succeeded in creating hungry pastors and hungry imams. All this in the bid to crush the resistance by the hungry people. We shall be free the day we realize that there are only hungry Nigerians.